I was stuck in a waiting room for like 4 hours last night, and that actually means something. I've been thinking, was Phase 4 a failure? Did Phase 4 actually achieve what it set up to be? I think now that we know all that's gonna happen in Phase 5 and there is not a lot to talk about until we get more news, it's a great opportunity to actually look at Phase 4 and tell us, did it fail? There is a lot of features in Phase 4. I think I should try to face this in the order that we got introduced to those mechanics. First of all, Phase 4, we hit level 60 of course. They essentially nerfed incursions into a daily tank because incursions were the worst cancer that ever happened to Sod. And we got a replacement for incursions, even though it was much weaker in XP wise, and I do not have a problem with that actually. That's the Firelands dailies. That's the dailies you can do in Searing Gorge. Every 3 hours there is an eruption and you gotta go kill the mobs that they ask you in the dailies. You are capped now. You cannot just simply do loop-the-loops around the whole place over and over again anymore. What these dailies are gonna give you is very important Hydraxian water loss reputation, and especially early on, maybe not anymore, but you are really gonna need that reputation because the 25 resistance enchant is very important, and of course the quintessences, so you can actually clear Molten Core, they are all there. So this little bit of speeding up the process helped a lot. Before that, we were supposed to kill a mob in Silitos over and over and over, or go farm trash in Molten Core, and farming trash in Molten Core was fast, but if you were one of the people that wanted to do it day one, you actually had to go to Silitos and lose like a day of your life. So this was very welcome. Of course, that also included a finally fleshed out Thorium Brotherhood reputation rewards, the new Dark Iron set with a lot more fire resistance, the new weapons. They were essentially just a separate version of the best in slot, the pre-raid best in slot. They were nothing amazing except for fire resistance. Your fire resistance set, you had a lot of choices there, but for the average player, the second that you step on Molten Core and you do the hit that you wanna do, they are pretty much worthless again. Now, I think there was a huge mistake they made, and we are probably gonna get it in Phase 5, but there is 2 items that stock like a sword tomb missing in the Dark Iron Brotherhood. That's Nightfall and that's the Annihilator, 2 of the most not iconic but very demanded items in vanilla. Of course, Nightfall increases the spell damage by 15%, that's the proc, and obviously that's gonna make it one of the most important debuffs in the game, especially now because we got several 200 classes that are viable. We got Red Paladins, we got Shamans, we got 200 Fury Warriors, which are apparently gonna do a lot better this phase, but they are still there, they still exist. And I think it's also a missed opportunity for balance, because I think an item like the Annihilator would have made it valuable for a lot of new players, or maybe for weaker classes to finally get a spot in a raid, to justify to the raid leader, hey, I might not do as much damage, but I got this axe that gives more damage to the raid, or maybe I got this axe that reduces the armor of the boss, so I'm still gonna be useful, you might as well take me. I always liked that concept, and it's a shame that we didn't see it. On the other hand, I can see why they didn't choose to put it in the game, because it would have trivialized the pre-best grind, and I gotta give them props where it's due. Actually, I think the pre-best experience of vanilla is the best part of vanilla. Very similar to TBC, the early level 60 experience in vanilla, where you got Ubers, you got Stratholm, you got all these dungeons that you gotta do, and there is always something productive for you to do, but at the same time it is not overwhelming, and it is not something where if you skip a one day you're gonna be forever behind, which is the thing that really pisses me off about retail. It's very curious that people are talking about heroic modes in Phase 5, that's one of the data mines, because if you look at Phase 4, I think it is a huge missed opportunity, the fact that we didn't get heroic dungeons instead of getting the difficulty. Oh, we're gonna talk about that, don't you worry about it, the difficulty system in Molten Core, oh, we're gonna so talk about that. But I think harder difficulty dungeons would have been a really good way of incentivizing people to keep playing the game. Maybe you could have kept the real reward system behind heroic dungeons, something like that. My suspicion that they are doing it now in Phase 5 instead of Phase 4 is not because they didn't want to make heroic dungeons. My suspicion is that it's a lot less work to make 2 heroic dungeons per phase than 10. I think that's the reason that we didn't get heroic Ubers. I think that's the reason that we didn't get heroic LBRS or BRD or whatever. That's too many dungeons that took too much time. I am convinced that's the only reason. The real system is quite a mind twister for me. That's also one of the flagship features of Phase 5, the real currency system. Every boss that's over level, I think 58, is gonna give you 1 token per day to a total of 66 possible bosses, and you can change them for a couple pre-raid best in slot items, maybe 1, maybe 2, depending on your spec, but for the most part, they were just a better version of the wild offerings, and it makes sense that you want to put a wild offering replacement, because who the hell is gonna farm wild offerings anymore when they are level 60? One thing I gotta say that I really liked about the Tarnished Undermine Real is the fact that it has an economic purpose. You can trade them for crates, and those crates have several trade goods that you can get. Is random, but you can buy those crates and open them and get a certain amount of valuable things that you can sell. Not to mention you can also use the reals to buy Molten Core reagents. After they opened Molten Core, they implemented that. And I think that putting a monetary incentive behind doing dungeons is an amazing thing. I want more of that. Actually, I want a monetary incentive, not GDKPs. Okay, looking at you people, I know you're gonna say it. Don't make me go there. Don't make me go up there and stop you. I really like the idea of making a little bit of money every time you go to raid or every time you go to a dungeon. And that's essentially what the Tarnished Undermine Real achieves. And if you look at the people running stuff, even today, like, it's not too hard after, 5 weeks in? It's not very hard to find a dungeon for pretty much anything going right now on a major server. That was not the case at all in Phase 3. The second people got their wild offerings, everybody stopped, because there was no reason to keep doing it. Not to mention wild offerings were beyond stupid, because all you had to do is kill the last boss, so people would just kill Princess over and over. Now you actually gotta go there and kill all the bosses, and that incentivizes people to actually kill a full run. And I gotta tell you, if you're one of the poor people that still gotta farm their Hand of Justice in BRD, the reals are probably the reason that you can still find healers or DPSers to go with you. Because there is very little loot, unless you are a melee, to get from BRD, but at the same time, there is a lot of bosses to kill in BRD, so there is money. Follow the money, like the Americans say. They are right. So I will say, against all odds, against the Reddit, that the Tarnished Undermine Real is low-key one of the best features in Phase 4. It achieved everything it set out to do, and it really breathed a lot of life into the community, and I want to see more of that this phase. And it looks like they're going to do that in Phase 5, although I don't know if that's sustainable with the same dungeons. We're going to have to see about that. I guess we can talk about the balance changes this phase, and of course I am warrior biased, and warriors were eating very good this phase, even though they weren't at the top, and they will always complain that they are not at the top. That's just warrior things for you, do not mind them. Particularly the tanking meta, even though I complained about the same problems in Phase 1, it is a lot better, it is a lot more balanced. Shamans are still beyond broken, and like the only real choice if you are serious about it, and that kinda sucks. But if you got the privilege of being Alliance where you don't have Shamans in your faction, as much as you complain about Shamans in PvP, you can go for pretty much any tank, and you got a very similar chance of success as any other tank. I would say maybe that Warlocks are a little favored this tier, that's for sure, but for the most part, if you want to be a warrior, if you want to be a paladin, I think it's never been a better phase to tank with those classes. The tier 1 set bonuses were very hit and miss. A couple of the sets were very, actually extremely uninspired. It's like 2% crit on them or something, when other classes got like an entire chain of how their class plays. Some sets are so good that had they not improved the Core Force mechanic in Phase 5, people would have skipped tier 2 sets entirely, and that's just like a testament of how insane some of the sets are. And that is also one of the reasons that Shadow Priest, for example, they got left behind this phase. Their sets are not that good. Not to mention they stopped supporting a lot of classes, like the Frost Mage set is like not even a thing really, like their bonus for Frost is a disgrace. Arcane set, what the hell is that? I think they completely gave up on Arcane DPS. And I don't want to say that it's been better before, okay? The DPS meta has always been a nightmare, the DPS meta has always been wildly unbalanced. What I'm gonna say is that it could have been a lot better, and I don't know, deleting Shamans of the game would fix half my problems, guys. I don't know about you guys. But very well, 2 weeks in, we got the world bosses. Kazak and Azuregos, they made them an instance, and they are not world bosses anymore. We just call them that. Now, the challenge of the world bosses was never the boss. The challenge of the world boss is either fighting the opposing faction trying to steal the kill from you, or more often than not, especially on PvE servers, for some reason they made world bosses a mechanic where like if one person dies next to you, it messes up the entire raid. So you would have to deal with people from your own faction intentionally dying on top of you. That was always a big problem. But the bosses themselves, Griffin aside, if you had 40 people, it would have been pretty easy. That's always been the case. They returned them to 20 men, and they are essentially punching bags. I mean, there is a slight DPS check on Kazak. You can pretty much do Azuregos with like 5 people if you want to. It's gonna take you an eternity. It's gonna take you like a really good 10 hours to kill him, but you can do it. So they are just essentially another 3-day lock lockout. They changed the lockouts. That's something I forgot to bring up. Yes, the lockouts got changed. They now reset on Tuesday and Friday instead of like a fixed 3 days, and that way they will reset the same day of the week. And that's a very welcome change for everybody. Back in Phase 2 and Phase 1, it was an absolute nightmare to get a raid set up because you had to change the raid day every week because of how it would shuffle everything. So that's been a nice change. The loot of the world bosses though is very hit and miss. My main problem with the world bosses is that there is only one good item on each of them. Unless you are a Shadow Priest or a Warlock, there is essentially nothing Kazakh has to offer except for the Empyrean Demolisher, and that makes it so you might be able to get 20 people. That's very hard nowadays. It's very hard to fill a group for a world boss because nobody wants to do them anymore because there is nothing in there for them. There is not even a real for your time in that boss. And if you do get a group going, you're gonna have to fight over the same maze for everybody because that's the only good item. So it absolutely sucks. I think the world bosses got ruined by their terrible loot table. I don't know if it would have trivialized Molten Core too much, but I think it would have done a world of good if they put like, I don't know, 2 fire resist items in the world bosses, something that everybody can get. I mean, it's not too late to do that change now, even though it is too late for them because they are not gonna do it. That's why it's too late. But I think just having like 2 or 3 more items that do not suck in each world boss would have gone a really far away. And that takes us to the next 3-day lockout, which is Onyxia. Onyxia is called the brood mother of the Black Dragonflight, but I actually like to call her the Pog Breaker because she destroys Pogs. It's not even close. She grabs the whole fist and she goes like, you can hear like a squeak going through. It just goes so fast in it. Now, Onyxia was always a pogging nightmare because all it takes is one guy to mess up and like you get a lot of trouble. The whelps, of course, deal with it. Many whelps. They also tuned her down to 20 people, which is something I can understand. Now, Onyxia has the Seasonal Mastery mechanics. The Seasonal Mastery mechanics in Onyxia where basically there is more ads, there is ad spawning that you need 2 tanks for, there are more whelps, they are stronger, and that's pretty much it. Same old, drop the dots, do not stand on fire, do not get breathed by fire. So your raids were decided by how many people would stay out of the fire. That's pretty much it, and it sounds easy but it's really not, because the main problem I always had with Onyxia, and they did not fix it at all, is that to this day it is super hard to tell where she's gonna do the fire breath on the end of Phase 2. I mean, you can tell where she's gonna go if you aim it and you do like trigonometry in your brain like 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, but that's stupid. That's always been a major gripe of me. I think it would have been a lot better if they made it so, I don't know, you would draw it on the ground and you could see where it was gonna go, but she would do it more often or faster or something like that to compensate. I think that would be a much healthier mechanic. But I think most of you people can tell me in the comments your horror stories trying to do Onyxia. Overall, even though once again I think the fire breath mechanic is super toxic, it's a really fun fight. I think Onyxia is one of my high points in Phase 4. I love doing Onyxia. As a tank it is a very fun fight. Melee DPSers are probably not having a lot of fun with it. That's not my problem. But there is nothing noteworthy or really inventive from Onyxia, so I think that's gonna be it. It's just a decent raid and I liked it, and it's just the same old Onyxia. If you liked Onyxia, you're gonna get a lot more of that now. And of course, that's gonna take us to the main raid of Phase 4, and that's gonna be Molten Core, the infamous Molten Boar. So what did they learn from 20 years of looking at this raid and seeing people complain about it every time we get a fresh, we gotta go there? It is my complete and utter conviction that Molten Core was thrown under the bus. They really did not give one damn what happened to this raid. I made an entire video complaining about this, and I will try to not reiterate it too much because that was a very long video. But since this is the season of retail, they had to put extra difficulty in the raid. You had to have heroic Molten Core. You couldn't just be happy knowing that you killed Molten Core. It has to be heroic something now. Now the way they implemented Molten Core is actually way stupider than heroic or mythic raids or whatever you want to call them, and I think it's very much antithetical to the way that vanilla as a game functions. And that's the very infamous, the very controversial hit system. There are 3 categories. You got hit 1, where you don't need anything, you can just go and it's normal Molten Core with a couple Seasonal Mastery mechanics on it, and that's fine and dandy. Seasonal Mastery mechanics do not make the raid a lot harder at all. The only real difficulty we had on week 1 doing hit 1 is that we actually kinda did not know any of the mechanics because we didn't play some, so that was the only problem. But if you could clear Molten Core in vanilla proper, you could clear Molten Core in Season of Discovery. Hit 1 is basically the same raid, it's not very hard. Hit 2, however, is when things change. You need 96 fire resistance or you will immediately die. That's not for the tanks, that's for everybody. For the most part, the mechanics are the same as Hit 1, just the bigger numbers. And the way that the hit mechanic works is that you get extra loot the higher up you go, except that in Hit 3 you get a new boss with more loot. That's another can of worms right there, because to do Hit 3 you need 226 fire resistance, and there is a reason that it is so unpopular, because it is stupid. That's why it's unpopular. In a nutshell, there are many reasons that I got many problems with the hit mechanic. First of all, you are never gonna be best in slot in Hit 3 because you gotta sacrifice so much of your gear to get a fire resistance cap, that, well, not cap, 226, that you will not be able to wear best in slot gear. And that's a problem, and I think this could have changed my entire perspective on the phase. They did not design Tier 1 around the hit mechanic. They put the same fire resistance values in all of Tier 1. They put a paltry 61 resistance in the entire set. So if you take the intended set for Molten Core that they intend you to use in the raid, after grinding and getting all the best gear you can get, you're still gonna be super short of the cap. And that's just stupid. Had they put 100 more resistance on the set, I think a lot of people would not have a problem with the hit mechanic. I think that would have been a very easy W for Blizzard, because, and this is the way they sold it to us, at least eventually if you grinded Molten Core you would have been able to hit level 3 without doing like something else. But no, if you want to do hit level 3 you're gonna have to go outside and you're gonna have to build your set of crappy greens and crappy blues with not many stats but just a lot of fire resistance for you, and that's gonna be your life. And I say that the Tier 1 not having fire resistance is what ruined it, because on a nutshell, I thought it was a great idea at the start, because that incentivized people to actually go to dungeons, to actually get stuff, because the pre-raid best in slot process also now included a lot of greens, a lot of blues with fire resistance, and that made it so a lot of classes that had very good profession gear, they still had to go out there and do stuff. And that's my main gripe with World of Warcraft nowadays, is that it's too raid loggy. There is not a good reason to keep playing after you get your pre-best gear and you're capable of clearing the raid. If you're a parser or something like that wants to get a 99 every week, there is some things for you to do, but the normal player, the non-autistic player, doesn't have anything to do outside of raiding anymore. Nothing that feels like it's worth their time anyway. And of course, if you clear hit level 3, you get greeted by the best feature of Season of Discovery, because people were very hyped when they heard that there was gonna be a new boss in Molten Core. The Firelands has a very rich history and lore. There is a lot of bosses you can literally steal from Cataclysm and put in the game. There are a lot of new characters that were established there, and there is like just so much creative freedom that you can take with it. It's a fire raid. How many things in the Warcraft franchise have fire on them? Like pretty much everything. They could have taken like a random fire elemental character from Retail, put it as a boss, and nobody would have complained. Anything would have fit in the raid. But what they chose to do, get this, it is the Molten Core. So what you're gonna fight for the next boss is the Molten Core. The literal Molten Core is a flaming chicken nugget, like a flaming rock, and you're throwing water at it. That's the fight. And I think this speaks to the toxic culture in Blizzard, because how come they were in a meeting with like 8 people discussing what they were gonna do for the last boss in Molten Core, and 7 people knew it was stupid, and nobody wanted to be the guy that told, hey, this is probably not something that's gonna go well, why don't we just rip off one of those fire elementals from Rat of the Lich King and nobody's gonna complain? Why do we have to do a flaming chicken nugget? Don't you think we hyped this up too much to put a flaming chicken nugget instead of a boss? So yes, the Molten Core was not very well received, and I am not shocked. So as ironic as it is, I think Molten Core, the flagship raid of the phase, is probably the weakest feature of Phase 4. And that's a shame, because I can see a world without all this extraneous system where work had gone somewhere else, that this could have been an easy 10 out of 10 banger. And sadly, I do not think that's gonna ever change. I do not think that's gonna happen, because I am told that internally they just think that this was a huge success, and fine, it was better than Sunken Temple, that's for them sure, but you gotta go really far to call this a success. Okay, maybe we shouldn't use the word success, because it did succeed. Maybe we should call it realized potential. I think the Molten Core is like by far one of the most wasted potential raids that we got so far in Sod. Now we are on the end game. We already already did Molten Core. We are on farm basically the whole time. We don't have like a big challenge unless you want to make an ult. And I think this is when Phase 4 is showing a lot more life than Phase 3. Absolutely, you can see it in the population. Now this chasm you see here is Phase 3, where like it pretty much destroyed the game. But if you see, here's the start of Phase 4, and you can see here we barely started playing losing players now, and it's only like 5% of the players. Compare that to Phase 3, where like in the third week we started dying already. It's been what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks of steady growth, and just the 6th week is where we started having a little bit of a dip. I do not think anybody is gonna argue that there is a lot more staying power in this phase, even though the phase overall has been smaller, because it is way harder to get people that quit to come back than it is to like start a new version and getting people for that. That's always gonna be a problem from now on. So to answer the question at the start, has Phase 4 been a success? I would say yes. It's definitely been a lot better than most of the other phases. There is a lot to do. The experience is very good. They did learn from many of their mistakes, but let's not kid ourselves, guys. There is a lot of room for improvement. There is an entire feast of improvement that you can jam up the butt of this thing. At least about this deep is all is missing in Sod right now. And even as I say that, I think it's gonna be quite a challenge for Phase 5 to hold a candle to Phase 4, because once again the dungeon offering is not gonna be as strong. In the best case scenario, we're gonna get 3 dungeons, and as much as people like hyping the raid, as much as people love seeing the PTR, and by the way, thank you guys for tuning in the PTR testing, that was awesome. Probably gonna do more community raids in the future, but as much as the hype it generates to have the raid in the game, what keeps people actually playing, not watching, not interested, not hyped, but playing the game is the dungeon offering. I think Phase 4 carried itself into like a very sustainable, very high staying power phase just through the sheer amount of dungeons you had to do. And I am very cautious, and I wanna plead to Agrend right now, right here and there, please do not abandon dungeons. Please really make us go there, or this phase is gonna die. But yes, this has been the entire retrospective of Phase 4, and the thesis of the retrospective is the same thesis as my thesis for the entirety of Sod. It's pretty good, but god damn, you make it very easy for me to find things to complain about. And isn't that the beauty about it? Subscribe, join the Discord, and thank you for watching!